Welcome back to day 2 of our live challenge. We are going for 9 days. If you're watching the replay, I would love to know that as well, but just put hashtag replay and that let me know where you're from. I know that we've had some people that have been in Oslo, I know in the US, Western Australia on the other side from where I am here in Australia. So it seems that we've got a wonderful global audience, which is wonderful. So this is day 2 of our 9-day challenge. It's all about how to go from invisible to influential trusted authority with a podcast. Today, we're going to talk about how to transform your expertise as a coach, as a consultant, from a want to a need. What's the difference? Well, a client may want your products and services, but when they need it, it becomes something that they really need right now. I liken it to, as women, when we see a handbag or we see a pair of shoes that we want, but when we need them, we will move heaven and earth, won't we? And look at our budgets and twist things around till we're able to get those things. That's what we want when we have ideal clients looking and listening to your content and what you offer them, so that it's not just a want, but a need. You're the only choice. And as we said here, from an overwhelming number of choices to becoming the only choice, while also having a binge listen or worthy podcast that positions you as a trusted authority to your ideal client, and they want to work with you. So just briefly who I am. As I mentioned yesterday in workshop 1, if you haven't gone and watched that, go back and watch the recording. It's here in the Podcasting with Purpose community. I started podcasting back in 2008, but fast forward all of the years in my involvement, even in the career industry where I started working and leveraging podcasts, I was a personal branding strategist. It's something that I love to do, and really where I feel that I really add value to the clients that I work with. But then bringing that personal branding strategy alongside podcast strategy and business strategy. How are we going to leverage a podcast as a coach, as a consultant, to build our brand and start to nurture listeners into leads? An award-winning podcast host, recognized as one of the top 20 business coaches in Melbourne, but I do work with clients globally. And so I support multi-passionate coaches and consultants is something that I certainly am too. And I know that many of you are here listening and watching this because you know that you've been put on this planet to make a much bigger impact in the world with your message, with your story, with the things that you have gone through, because you now are someone who can support your clients to go through that, but much quicker and in a far more efficient and effective way. However, you want to make an impact in the world, a much bigger impact, but many of you still may seem unheard, unseen, and you want to go from invisible to influential trusted authority, the choice versus just a choice with your ideal client. And if that sounds like you are in the right place. Just a reminder to get the best from this day. Turn off all of the distractions, your phone, all of that, and just be present. I'm going to try and keep this to an hour. Got a lot of content again today, but if you haven't already got the workbook, industrythoughtleaderacademy.com/invisible to influential, go and download it from there. We'll send you a link, as well as the calendar and the agenda as well of what we're going to cover, and also how you can win or be in the draw for winning a $10,000 scholarship. Again, commit to your success. Many people, as I mentioned yesterday, who have come to a challenge, various challenges that I've run over the years, have said they've taken away so much more than even some of the things that they've invested in. So that is my intention, that you will go away thinking, my goodness, I had no idea. For some of you, you're reconfirming some of the things that you thought were true. So act as if you've paid for this event. It just shifts that mindset. Leave any self-doubt behind. You've got a message that you need to share because someone, and lots of someones out in the world, need to hear it. And by you keeping it to yourself or in a very small circle is not doing the world any justice. So leave that self-doubt behind, leverage your workbook, leverage the community, if you haven't already, and write down some of those top questions. And hopefully I've got time at the end of today to be able to share them. And as always, be inspired. Now, the prizes, I'll share a little bit more at the end, but there's a scholarship to my 12-month Invisible to Influential Trusted Authority with a podcast acceleration program. How do you get in it? Well, I'm just hinting to you, are you sharing your ahas in our Podcasting with Purpose community? You need to be in the running. So a recap of yesterday, if you haven't watched it, go and do that. But for those of you who are back for day 2, here are some of the things we covered. 3 indicators you're not ready to start a podcast yet. 4 podcasting myths, truths. 7 common podcasting mistakes. 7 common personal branding myths and mistakes. The definition of what is distinguishable, uncopyable, and irresistible. We talked about the podcast positioning quadrant, the trusted authority, which is what that graphic is there. When you're seen as that trusted authority, you become the choice versus just a choice with your podcast. And then eventually too, with the services that you offer. And we also talked about the distinction model, which is the model that will help you go from invisible to influential trusted authority. And today we're going to dive a little bit deeper into one of the components of that blueprint. Now, here are just some of the ahas that I saw was being shared in the group. And I wanted to share them with you too for a couple of reasons. Number one, for some of you who may not have shared your aha, often it's because you may think, oh, I'm the only one who thinks like that or experiencing that. And I want you to realize that you are one. And this is for me too, a reminder that the things that we are experiencing, and as we're not getting out there and sharing our message, many others are experiencing as well. So you're certainly not alone. So Laurie, I mean, she is just a gun. I cannot wait for her to launch her podcast. It's so needed out in the world. And hers was really to tap into her brand archetypes. She says, I think it will really help me pull my focus into line when it comes to tapping into the emotions of my ICA. Absolutely. And she's actually going through the 90-day sprint idea to launch your podcast right at this moment. So it's great that she could follow along. Karen says, there were a number of great takeaways. My first one was probably don't get focused on getting large numbers, focus on reaching the right people who need you. This is huge, huge, because if you try to be all things to all people, you often nothing to no one, because your message is too broad and not really focusing on your ideal clients' issues, problems, challenges. So Karen, that is a huge aha, and I'm sharing that as a way to emphasize to others, you need to get clear on that first. Nejat said, my aha was actually getting present to the fact that clarity about brand as a business is important before starting a podcast. I knew it, but it came again as an insight. Absolutely, because your brand and the brand experience, as you bring that to life as a podcast host, whether you're sharing a solo show or whether you are, interviewing guests, the experience that you create for your guest, for the listener, for your audience, is what's going to make the difference. You could be sharing the same topic as many other people who've got podcasts, but the reason that your podcast is the first podcast that people listen to is because you have this experience that you create that people just love listening to you. Let me share an example while I'm checking to make sure that I am actually live. Yes, I am in the group. So I asked my community over on LinkedIn and shared a little bit of information around, people come for the topic, they return for the host, and about creating that listener experience, that unique and uncopyable experience through knowing your brand and who you want to be. And a lot of times it's getting clarity on who you are already and bringing that forward with far more intention and courage. It takes courage, doesn't it, to step out and share. And one of the people who commented back, and I'm so glad he did, because it really validated what I was seeing and what I thought was really happening. And he said that he's an avid subscriber to many other podcasts, and often if he has 20 or so minutes to listen and catch up on a show, what he'll do is he'll grab his smartphone, he'll scroll through some of the podcasts who have released most recent episodes, and he'll often go, oh, I like the way that host engages and shares, and I'll listen to that one. And so he said, I never really thought of it that way, but it's true. I selected that particular host because of the way that they approached the topic and just who they were. So that's really important. And it's all about that personal brand. And of course, your brand as a business. Belinda says, my takeaway was the comment, they come for the topic and they return for the host and me, making it important for me to share me, be it my stories, my tone, and letting my personality show up as I talk. I find this a challenge, but your statement gives me purpose to overcome hiding behind a message and just being about my topic. Belinda, yes, yes, yes. And you know what? As I mentioned earlier, it takes courage, doesn't it, to step out and be you. But I tell you what, you may be the breath of fresh air that your ideal client is looking for, waiting for. It may even be to the point where you're the breath of fresh air that your industry is looking for and waiting for. Because, and if the last 2 years has not created this a need to reinvent, redefine many approaches and certain things. Now is such an important time to get out there, and your ideal client, your community, the tribe, whatever you want to call it, will resonate with your message. And the amount of times that I've heard people, even not sharing a podcast, but sharing content, the feedback that they got and the relief, if you will, of their ideal clients that said, I was waiting. I'm just so glad you shared that story. So I hope, Belinda, that gives you, gives you that impetus to go, you know what? This is it. I need to get out there and share my message. And Anne says, my takeaway from listening to you was becoming even more conscious that part of the reason why I'm not starting with podcasting, which is that I find it a challenge to know how to structure the content and what to include. That is another really great because what that does, and you know, if you go back to yesterday, workshop 1, where we talked about maybe you're not quite ready to launch a podcast. And the first was around that message, wasn't it? And around where do you want to position yourself as that trusted authority? What are some of those topics and themes that you really want to speak about? We're going to talk a little bit about that today when we move forward into one of the components of the Distinction Blueprint. But these are some great ahas. If you're still catching up on the workshop, still go back to workshop 1 and let me know what that aha is, because it just validates that. There's something about documenting something that just emphasizes that in your mind. So there we go. Let's dive into the distinction model, but particularly today, the message. The message is so important. And as we identified with some of the ahas, it was around that message that really was important, and some of that aha. So let's talk about this word authenticity, which many of you have probably heard over the last number of years about, oh, be authentic this and be authentic that, to the point where authenticity and people talking about being authentic when they were anything but, it became almost like this buzzword. But I say, as a personal brand strategist, who, by the way, we talked about archetypes. Laurie said her archetype. My very first archetype, my leading archetype is explorer. And explorer is all about seeking the truth of who we are and what we stand for, what makes us us, tapping into your purpose, your calling, whatever you want to talk about, whatever you want to call it. So the explorer is all about finding that authentic pathway. Who are you? So when I hear the word authenticity, to me, it lights me up, because that's what my purpose is all about, helping others to discover what their purpose is through their authenticity. And so authenticity, or their authentic path forward. Authenticity is not a buzzword. I think it's paramount. It's paramount. So authenticity has long been debated, as I mentioned there. And I remember years ago writing an article, and I did a bit of research on some of the other articles that are out there, actually back in 2011, which was quite some time ago, and we're still talking about it today. So personal branding, is authenticity really important? And an author wrote, is it really about keeping it real? What if keeping it real for one particular person means being rude and obnoxious? Because that's kind of what authenticity is for them. That's not being authentic. That just means that the person or the behavior you are exhibiting tends to gravitate to being rude and obnoxious. And I think that they just need to change their behavior a little bit. So it doesn't mean being angry, being whatever, even an emotion. It's not, that's not authenticity at all. So keeping it real, if you've got a reputation for being rude and obnoxious, that's not what I'm talking about. And I'm not talking about faking it either, faking it till you make it. What does it mean if someone doesn't necessarily have the ability to be empathetic? Can you fake compassion and empathy? This is what a writer was asking. And I don't think you can fake that, but authenticity is recognizing, who am I? What are some of my character, my qualities, my mannerisms? And then being the best of those and intentionally bringing that forward. So when you hear the word authenticity, don't let your eyes glaze over or roll, oh, yeah, I heard that, people talk about that. It's not really important. It actually is. It just means if you're not sure who you are and some of the key things that really stand out for you, and what makes you need to dig a little bit deeper. So wanted to share that. Okay, so less is more when it comes to your message. This is actually, I think I've slipped a slide. Here we go. This is when it comes to your message, less is more. And the first less is more that I wanted to talk about, especially when it comes to coaches and consultants, because this is something that I often see, is that we overwhelm our clients with our content, or our community and our audience with our content, because we want them to know everything that we know, because we've done a lot of learning. Many of us are avid learners. So we've learned a lot of different modalities and ways to support people. And so what might have taken us 12 years, 15 years, 20 years, whatever, your life's journey, you don't and cannot expect to share that all in one 20-minute podcast or in one article. And so whilst we may be well-meaning in sharing as much as we can to support clients, it actually overwhelms them. And so the content that you want to share needs to be in such a way that it's going to give a learning, it's going to give an aha, it's going to set the path, build momentum to the client eventually getting some form of breakthrough. And in some instances, it can be instant, can't it? When someone is able to reshape or reframe their thinking, can instantly impact their actions and ultimately results. But we don't want to overwhelm. So just be mindful, less is more. Don't overwhelm your clients. Similarly, don't underwhelm people. And this is where we may be sharing the same old as everybody else is doing. If you're continuing to share a similar message that everyone else is sharing, what makes you unique and uncopyable? That just means that you've got to dive a little bit deeper into your story, the learnings. I mentioned yesterday with the distinction blueprint, what are your methodologies? And we're going to talk about that a little bit more tomorrow in tomorrow's workshop. But don't underwhelm by regurgitating the same information. You want to make sure that you spend some time in really identifying what are some of your core principles, some of your teachings, some of your methodologies, even if you are certified in a specific modality or even in a coaching program that many others are as well. I know many coaches do that. You become certified in a specific program, and you're now able and licensed to be able to deliver that. But you want to identify, what's my unique brand and message? What is different about me and all of the other hundreds, if not thousands of other coaches who are also certified in that particular modality or coaching program? And this is so important too, when less is more. We need to unlearn our industry jargon and our terminologies. Our clients don't know what that means anyway. And if we continue to use terms that we use in our coaching industry, what are some of the ones that I've just seen recently? Rewire your brain. like that to us, rewire your thinking, there are some other ones that I think of, I'll share. To us, it's just normal. It's like, oh, I know what that means. Yeah, when you change your thoughts, change your behavior, change your results. But to clients, ideal clients who have no idea about the mind and, all of the things that impact our thoughts and so forth, they have no idea. So we need to bring our message across in words and language that they resonate with. I remember years ago, I was looking for a specific coach with a modality in a specialized area. And I went to a website here in Australia that was their organization, their governing body. And I noticed that a lot of the way to search for coaches was through the modality. And so that was helpful for me. But I remember thinking, my goodness, if I was a client and I had a problem, say with insomnia, and I was finding it hard to go to sleep, to fall asleep of a nighttime, I would not be looking for a coach with their modality because I wouldn't have a clue. What is NLP? I mean, I know what NLP is because I'm trained in neuro-linguistics program. Some of you are kinesiologists, others do tapping, so there's a lot of wonderful methodologies and modalities that you use, but your clients aren't searching for the methodologies and the modalities. They're searching for coach that helps with insomnia. How can I, whatever it is, speaking in public, getting over my fear of speaking in public. That's the kind of things that they're searching for. So unlearn industry jargon terminologies and learn the language your ideal clients is using when they're searching and when they're sharing their problems and the things that they say to themselves when they don't think anyone else is there listening and looking. That's the kind of language you want to share and bring into your podcast and all of your content, actually. So let's dive a little bit deeper into some of the core components within the message. And I'm going to talk about your umbrella statement today. I'm going to talk about your markers and milestones, which is your invisible thread, kind of your story, as well as some signature sayings and slogans, what they are. Now, I want to repeat what I said yesterday. Please do not be overwhelmed. My goal for you today is to now be aware of these three things and then looking through your business and then asking yourself, am I clear on these things? If it's a yes, then fantastic. Give yourself a pat on the back. You've got that covered. But if it's not really, I need to get clearer, then give yourself a pat on the back as well, because that just means you now know and have clarity on what you need to focus on. So let's dive into the umbrella statement. And so what if, and I love these what if statements because I resonate with all of these. This is me. You've got numerous modalities that you can use with clients. You've got a toolkit full of tools and different techniques. I remember when I was doing my counseling diploma, and we were learning about all these different modalities. And one of them, I can't remember what it was. I think it was self-centered. I think it was self-centered. Self-centered sounds so horrible. Maybe I've termed it wrong, but it was around self-centered counseling, where you allowed the client to really direct the whole coaching, the whole counseling session. So you would hardly say anything. You would just ask a question, an open-ended question, and allow the client just to keep talking. And every now and again, you would put another comment, and that would take them off. You didn't even have a finish time. You were person-centered. It wasn't self-centered. It was person-centered counseling. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, that is not one that I really can use. I can use different aspects of what we were taught, but I certainly would not resonate with being a person-centered coach, because I'm too much of results, too much on let's just help you shift through that. It's almost like, when you can't help yourself from kind of getting in there because you can kind of see that nail sticking out of that person's head. I just don't know what's wrong, why I have this. I don't know if you've seen that video. Anyway, you've got a toolkit full of tools and techniques. You've got diverse experience that doesn't seem to have any correlation to each other. How does that experience, or how can I bring that particular client or the work that I've done in that into my story now. How is it relevant? Well, guess what? If you can't see the relevance, it's going to be very hard for your ideal client to see it too. Maybe you enjoy learning new ways that you can help clients. You love personal development and will never give up learning. Absolutely. You get bored easily and need new creative projects and opportunities and experiences. By the way, if that sounds like you may just be an explorer archetype as well, or fill in the gap. And so for you, you find that, you're moving around quite a bit. And now you're asking yourself, well, how am I going to handle all of that? How am I going to bring that all together in one concise statement and message? Well, I've kind of already given you a hint. It's with your umbrella statement. And I came up with the saying because I'll show you a couple of examples how I've used it. And I'd never really call it an umbrella statement, but what it does is it kind of overarches all of the things that you do, all of your modalities, all of the areas of your tools, and your techniques and your massive toolkit. And it really provides what I call, when you create your umbrella statement, an outcome-focused statement that showcases your promise of value, what you offer clients, and a promise of expectation. The promise of value is you showcasing and sharing with them that you have the solution. You're able to support them in the area that they're struggling with. And the promise of expectation is, as you're sharing your message, they can almost future pace themselves. That's a coaching technique of they can see themselves in the future having achieved that goal, because that's what your umbrella statement does when you've got a really clearly defined one. And so we're going to talk about that today. Now, as I mentioned earlier, it's really good for multi-passionate individuals who love learning. You've got diverse expertise and you're struggling to focus on that one thing. You'll often hear me say, are you struggling to focus on that one thing? And it really is around looking at your diverse experience and seeing it not as lots of diverse experience, but under that one umbrella, and how now you can help people. So I would say that your diverse experience adds an even richer layer to your to your clients when you're able to see it that way. So your overarching outcome focused statement that showcases your promise of value and promise of expectation. That's what your umbrella statement is. It can also be used as your tagline. And it can also inform you as to kind of the ideal name for your overall podcast, as well as the topics that you'll be sharing on your podcast. So this can be really helpful. So let me give you an example, because I think examples really work well, because it allows you to see it through the lens of how you can apply this. So if I look back at my experience in the career industry, I was doing resume development. I was a certified behavioral consultant. I love to support clients in job search, tapping into the hidden job market. I created a whole e-course on that. Interview coaching. I wrote my book, 10 Key Steps to Ace That Interview. I love the salary negotiation as well. I was doing LinkedIn profile writing, personal branding, lots of different things. And so if someone said to me, well, what out of one of those things did you really love doing? I could not say I want to just do. If I thought I was only going to do one of those, I would have got bored really quickly. So I love doing them all. So how can you become a trusted authority in one area, as well as position yourself as just the choice versus a choice when your ideal client that you have comes to you and they see all of these different things? How can you really add value to that? An umbrella statement. So what I ended up doing was thinking about, well, what do my clients want? And what can I support them with, looking at all of the different areas that I can support them in? So what I did was I kind of made an umbrella statement, or created one, that allowed them to see the journey through their career. So getting noticed, which was the resumes, it was their LinkedIn profile, everything around the personal branding, their documentation that they needed to have in place to help them stand out in front of ideal decision makers to get that interview. So getting noticed, that was that component. Getting hired was the interview coaching. What else? Going back and creating case studies if they went for the second interview. It was the confidence. How do I relate to people who are different communication styles? that I'm sitting across the table with. All of those different areas I could support people with, the getting hired and then getting paid what you're worth, was around the salary negotiation, and really being able to communicate in person what their paper said, their paper resume said. And so that was my statement: get noticed, get hired, get paid what you're worth. That was my umbrella statement: the promise of value and promise of expectation. If clients worked with me, they would get noticed, they would be able to get hired, and they would be able to get paid what you're worth. So the topics that I would have shared on my podcast would have been around those particular areas. But I would have said, so to help you get noticed, get hired, get paid what you're worth, we're going to talk about today the get paid what you're worth aspect, because you could get in front of an ideal decision maker with your ideal role, but if you're not able to negotiate a win-win salary, then you might end up being in a role that you love, but feeling very underpaid and undervalued. And there's nothing worse, is there, as a coach or a consultant, feeling that the work that we're doing is undervalued and we've undercharged. Similarly in the career industry as well. So this is a lesson that we can learn too from the executive realm. So you can see that it would have informed, and it did inform, as to all of the different topics, but I was able to share it under that one umbrella. So now if I look at another example with my work with entrepreneurs, these are all of the things that I can help them with: personal brand, and I do, from my career days, communication and negotiation from my career days, understanding themselves and others from my career days and the certifications that I did there, and with being a certified brand archetype consultant too, in the area of marketing, in the area of money mindset, because I know that I can support my clients in positioning themselves with incredible content, but unless they have the right mindset to charge what they're worth, they're still going to undervalue and undercharge. So I love that area too: mindset, NLP and other coaching modalities, many other certifications, and of course podcasting, 13 years, and a lot of things that I've done. And I've looked back on the area of podcasting, I've used some of those things that I've learned, that we learn. Many of us have probably got similar skills. But what I've done is I've looked at those skills under the umbrella of, well, how can I relate this to podcasting? How can I add value in that particular area? So for some of you, it's going back and looking at, well, what can I use? And then really hone in an area that no one else really is speaking about, or very differently, bring a unique spin to that, go deeper in a certain area. But then looking at, well, how can we put this together? And for me, putting it in one particular statement was really around building your reach, building reputation, and your revenue by nurturing listeners into leads from your very first episode. And now, of course, it's going from invisible to influential, trusted authority. And so again, I hope through sharing that example, you can then now go and look back at what you've been doing and start to pen your umbrella statement yourself as well. So the next, let's dive in. I'm just doing a check on the time. Good timing. Is your invisible thread. And this sits under the umbrella statement. Actually, it's a number of different things there. Your invisible thread, which is really your markers and milestones. What are markers and milestones? I'm glad you asked. So markers, these are significant events. So challenges, problems, things that you've struggled with or had to overcome that you've faced, that you've had to overcome by creating new ways or innovative methodologies or a set of unique steps, which you now teach your clients. So your signature system, when you put it together. Now, it doesn't mean that you need to completely reinvent everything that your industry is doing. You don't have to do something that vast. It's just doing something differently and a different approach, but that's going to allow your clients to get to their outcome quicker, whatever the outcome is, and whatever way in which you deliver it. And so often we don't recognize these markers as being significant. So that's why I'm sharing it with you today. Some of the significant events that you have gone through, when you spend a little bit of time just sitting with them. Like one of the significant events for me was that time I went through my worst business failure ever, and I started Women in Leadership podcast and got those 2 4-figure clients accidentally. Now, I didn't recognize that that was a significant marker for me till many years later. And then I thought, that's actually quite relevant and quite important for me to include in my story. So here's what you do need to think about when you're looking at your markers. They have to resonate with your client, and they must validate and answer the question, why you and why now? And so that's really important when you're thinking about your market, these significant events. And I tell you, if you're a person who spots typos, you're probably looking at that. I'm going to change that after today. But anyway, so that's what a market is. What are some of the significant events that you have gone through? Start documenting, and that's basically what I say to clients. Document them all, and you might have a huge list. Then go through and really see, what out of that is relevant with my ideal client, resonates with them. And when I look at what I support clients with, what of those markers mostly validate and has more weight, if you were to score them from 1 to 3 as a must importance, they must validate, why and why you and why now. That's a marker. A marker in the career industry would have been to build some rapport with clients who are confused about their careers and unsure what their dream job is. So when I look back at one of my markers, and this is true, by the way, I fell off my horse and I got concussion. And that led me to where I was today, helping people find a career that they loved. Because I remember when I fell off my horse, I couldn't concentrate, couldn't think, I had headaches. I've lost my memory, actually parts of my memory. So I spent over 6 months going to hospital to retrain my brain, kind of thing. They were doing some work, the doctors then, about retraining your brain with memory. So I would get picked up by ambulance for 6 months, went to a hospital, did all of these exercises, and slowly recovered. And so that event had always caused me to kind of think, if that accident didn't happen, would I still be in the career that I am today? Because my pathway kind of wound all over the place. I always wanted to be a teacher, and my entire family is teachers, from kindergarten teacher all the way through to professor. And because of that accident, I wasn't able to go into teaching. But fast forward now, I'm so glad, because I realized that I'm an introvert, and a room full of children would have worn me out in the first week, I'm sure. Okay, so that was an example of a marker. What are some of yours? Now, when we're talking about milestones, these are the successes and achievements that have come about through you addressing that challenge and using your systems and the steps that you will now teach clients. And they have to be relevant to your ideal client that want that outcome as well. And they must validate your teaching and your methodologies and be positioned uniquely from everyone else in your industry. Now, when you look at that, you're probably thinking, how do I know all of these things? They're there. It's just there. Then, obviously, if you're struggling to get clarity, then you're in the right place, because this is exactly what I love to support clients in recognizing and then creating these stories. So if I think of the story that I just shared in the career industry, some of the milestones was that I went back to night school, and I was going to then go to university to do my teaching degree. But my mother then suggested that I could do some part-time work to get a little bit of income whilst we waited for the new year. And then I would go back and redo that whole year again. But I ended up in a couple of jobs, and then my mother said, well, why don't you then go just get an office job and then wait till the new year? But that office job, I absolutely loved. I ended up getting, by the way, 2 pay rises, which I didn't tell my mum, because I thought, if I tell my mum, she's going to put my board up. But, my employers, my bosses were so impressed with the work. They said, oh, we just have to increase your salary because you're doing way more than we thought. And it was a job that I absolutely thought that I wouldn't enjoy, and I did. And it kind of led me on the path to where I was, helping people with careers. And I realized, looking back, that I was definitely in the right place. And I shared that story because, so often my clients hated their jobs, and it unfortunately tarnished the entire way that they looked at their work. And when we unpacked it, they realized that actually they didn't hate the job at all, but it was just this particular component, or when this happened. And so I'm sharing this because when you start to explore your experience and your stories and your journeys, that invisible thread will start to appear and be quite no longer invisible. And that's the kind of stories that you want to weave. And when you add your signature system on top of that and your methodologies, your teaching, the steps that you take clients through, that's why you become the choice. Rather than just a choice, because they resonate with your story, and some of that story is telling their journey too. So I hope that just to spend a little bit of time on that, because I know that once you understand this and it gets clear, these are the kind of things that's then going to inform the type of content and and comments that you start to share with clients. Another milestone, an example for entrepreneurs, my worst business failure ever, now the best thing that ever happened to me. As I mentioned, Women in Leadership podcast, those 3 episodes. There are so many lessons that I can take and I share from that experience. Not that I would ever want anyone to have to go through that experience, and I certainly wouldn't want to go through that one again, but it really has shaped the character and who I am today. And so some of you, you've got a gold mine full of invisible threads and one clear one that is going to resonate and pull all of your content together in your podcast. Let's talk about signature sayings and slogans. Now, these are the pearls of wisdom that you share that either challenges the status quo or it innovates and transforms. And these can also become branded hashtags. Now, they may also be borrowed from paradox statements. And as we know, paradox are kind of short statements that have for the shortness and the simplicity, they have a powerful punch packed behind them in their aha. Like, for instance, that less is more. There are so many in-depth teachings that can come from that. And that's the kind of thing that I'm really encouraging you to start thinking about. Now, you'll have your own signature sayings and slogans, and you'll also borrow from some of the paradox that are out there too, such as the end in mind. You have to start with the end in mind. Now, that's not necessarily a hashtag that I created, and it's certainly not mine either. I think it was Stephen Covey who said that. But I borrow that because I know that it is so important for you to have an end in mind as far as your brand and your positioning and your message and all of the things that we're talking about in these first early days of these workshops, because it's going to inform what your robust podcast strategy is going to do as you layer that on top. So for me, a couple of examples, the message before microphone. You would have heard me say yesterday, because you cannot edit and mix compelling content from fluff and banter, even if it was recorded on the most expensive microphone on the market. I also have another one, podcasting with purpose. That's actually a name of my program, actually, that overarches. We are podcasting with purpose, with intention. That's why we spend so much time looking and unpacking at the message, at all of the different things. And in coming days, as I continue to share as well, it's all around podcasting with purpose. It's intentional. It's not just getting a microphone, plugging it in, and then having a casual chat, unless, of course, that is your overall strategy and intention. But I know as coaches and consultants, we want far more, don't we? We want the success, significance, and to make a much bigger impact in the world. So what are some of the sayings that you say? What are some of the slogans that you might say that can very much be woven and just bring that extra layer to the content that you're sharing, that you'll become known for that? That's the kind of thing that I'm talking about when we're talking about signature sayings and slogans. So start thinking about those. All righty, we've still got a little bit of time left, which is good. And I know that I shared quite a bit of information, so you probably want to go away and start to unpack a bit of that for yourself today. But really, what did we cover today? We looked at the message, which was just one of the components of the distinction blueprint, and how to transform your expertise from a want into a need, and from an overwhelming number of choices to becoming the only choice, while having a binge-worthy podcast that positions you as a trusted authority that your ideal clients wants to work with. We talked about authenticity, It's not a buzzword. It's actually paramount. And for those of you who know what your brand archetypes are, you'll know what I'm talking about, because some of the words and the phrases, they're just you. They describe you to a T, and now bringing that out into your podcast is important. We talked about how less is actually more. We talked about not overwhelming your audience with too much content, or not overwhelming or underwhelming them because you're talking about the same thing and the same stories and the same old that everybody else is talking about. We talked about the importance of unlearning industry jargon and terminologies and learning the language by which your clients are using to describe them, and then weaving that in to your content. And then we talked about the message component of the distinction model. We touched on the umbrella statement. We touched on your invisible thread, your markers and milestones. And we talked about your signature sayings and slogans. So we covered quite a bit. But again, as I said, don't be overwhelmed. I want to give you an overview. I want to share what you may not know. You don't know what you don't know. Now you know that if you get clear on these things, and even the clarity that, hey, I actually need support in getting clear on these things, that's a huge win. So tomorrow, what are we talking about tomorrow? We're going to talk about how not to leave tens of thousands of dollars on the table, but rather how to nurture and build long-term client relationships that lead to profitable and sustainable business growth. So come back tomorrow again after you've listened to, if you're only catching the recording of day 1 and day 2. So we've got more to cover as we're building on what we've learned over the last 2 days. All right, we're just about at the end, and then I'm going to open up for Q&A. By the way, for those of you who are in the Zoom room, if you start thinking about some of the questions that you might have and start typing them into the chat, because I'll circle back and I'll make sure that I answer those. So if you want to be in the running for the prize, Invisible to Influential Trusted Authority, 12-month with a podcast acceleration program. Stage 1, we're going to ignite your inner champion. We're going to go deep on all of the things that make the distinction blueprint for you. We're going to unpack that, give you clarity so that you know everything with clarity and certainty. Then we're going to move into another 90-day sprint, which is accelerating your authority through the idea to launch your podcast. Then we're going to lay out that robust podcast strategy. Once your podcast is launched, doesn't end there. You want to continue to build that legacy in stage 3 with another 90-day sprint, where we're going to help you build that momentum and impact, leveraging your podcast. And even podcast interviews too, by the way, so that you can start to be an awesome, incredible, trusted authority as a guest on other people's podcasts. Then it doesn't end there. We step into stage 4, the last 90-day sprint, where again, we're continuing to build your legacy, but we're really looking at scaling up your influence and impact, looking at your offerings, taking them to the next level. And that 12-month program is valued at $10,000. So to get into the winning, first of all, you've got to be part of this whole 9-day challenge. You need to attend all of the days, training days, or at least watch the recordings and share your biggest aha from each day in the community, Podcasting with Purpose. There's the link, podcastingwithpurpose.com/community. There are different posts with a graphic that says workshop 1 aha, workshop 2, and there'll be those graphics there, so you'll know exactly where to put that aha and share that. Now, there have been some selfies with workbook. By the way, the selfie doesn't necessarily need to be your face. It can be your computer and just holding up your workbook, and then you just share that across social. Yeah, that's how you get to enter. And if you want to know a little bit more, industrythoughtleaderacademy.com/win is where you can find out a bit more. Just recaps what I've just shared with you. But the winner will be announced later this week.